just start on talking about maybe some of the things we've been seeing emerge in the last few weeks and months with the Black Lives Matter resurgence and some of the responses from the government and from the far right. Probably what is of most sort of key and most contentious is some of the mobilizations or lack of mobilizations against the against sort of far right milieu trying to gather itself and regain ground effectively. So you had essentially the movement in the US, essentially kind of Black Lives Matter, formed in 2014 in response to several killings of young Black men, women, and children by police officers in the US. And that movement initially was quite militant in the sense of the demands that were being made were very grassroots, coming from very poor communities, Black African-American communities on the ground. A movement appeared supporting all kinds of different political trajectories and opinions, and forming what I would say would be quite a wide united front with no real imposed leadership in the beginning, which then kind of formed a sort of united movement under Black Lives Matter with the first founding conference. And there, when I was flown over to Cleveland, Ohio in 2015, before I was charged by the police here actually for sort of activist work, which meant I could still fly there. It was really interesting to see some of the contentions. So you have similarly what is playing out here in the remnants of that discussion or that debate in the movement is also, you know, the remnants of that is happening and playing out on the streets here today. So you had a very big contention between maybe some of the more Black and Asian middle class elements to the political movement that wanted to move towards a reformist and electoral strategy with the entire political movement itself at loggerheads with maybe the more militant grassroots fringes of the community that wanted to see physical confrontations and make organic grassroots demands for, you know, better housing conditions, say like public libraries for kids, kitchens for children, all the stuff that, you know, maybe the state would have been providing, but has really pulled back in America over the last 30 years. And so essentially the militant part of Black Lives Matter in 2015 was really pushed out and alienated by the majority of the leadership because of its differences with not getting behind the Democratic Party and pushing the movement through an electoral strategy in different states. Obviously, more information has come to light whereby some of the sort of political alliances that the large anti-racist movement, being reformist in its nature, has formed, has shown some alliances with, you know, multi-millionaire corporations or, you know, wealthy individuals. I mean, it's pretty well known and obvious and evident, even to me, that, you know, George Soros, for whatever reason, was funding the organization at the time. In fact, the money I flew over on was George Soros's money to fly to BLM. So he backed the first conference with $2 million. For what reasons, I'm not too sure. Why, I'm not too sure. And for what objectives, I still don't know. But that has only really grown as a new sort of Black popular united movement has formed in America. If we fast forward to today, over the last few years, you've had not just the Black, Asian, whatever political movement there was in America, but probably across the world, has all faced turmoil and political crises, really, as organizations, activists, and all sorts of people have had to sort of scramble and try to reform or rejig or re-identify or try to pull or update their politics, which may have been forged in the last, 30, 40 years of struggle, to try and make sense of it to where it relates to young people today. And so the entire left, I would say, in the Western Hemisphere has been in crisis for a long time. Whether it's a political left here in Britain, whether it's the political left in America, old elements, new elements are coming into the fray and having ideological contestation with each other. What's interesting, if we fast forward to today, is some of the initial grassroots, you could say, work that we laid down is kind of coming to fruition. And there are some surprising nice things about that I've noticed, in the sense of the new generation on the streets. They're not my age, so I'm 28. The new generation on the streets are 16 and 17. And this current, even if you don't call it a generation, let's just use a sort of generation for the sake of, they have different political views, perspectives than we did back in 2010 and 2015. The initial kind of perspective they have is much more militant and more advanced political understanding of my generation that came out of spontaneous response to, the removal of EMA, the tripling of tuition fees, the Labour Council, which stripped assets off, and then the Tories getting elected, this whole austerity campaign in Britain. They're much more advanced in their political arguments these days, and they're much more militant. Maybe that's because of the last 10 years of political work that everyone has been contributing to, whether it's in trade unions, whether it's in your local area, anti-cuts. Maybe it's just the result of the climate we're in, and the stakes are really high. And so obviously the new generation are forged from those kind of political sentiments and that anger. But if I just quickly move on to sort of slide over to maybe some of the stuff around what's happened here in the last few weeks, if that transition is possible, is probably around how some of the movement demands here have resulted in obviously targeting of racist or historically racist slave owner type, stuff, or symbolic statues and a sentiment of, a racist past involved in slavery. And obviously some of the demands have kind of come from a very interesting origin of the demands of removing statues is not a new one. It is, and it was a student, I would say a student movement demand back, over the last 10 years. And interestingly enough, that demand has been the one that's come through first. It's interesting. It could be for reasons of media, social media, the way that is impacted, the way in which iconography and the targeting of statues is symbolic in the sense of it represents a way of really regaining territory, not just physically and in reality, but also digitally as well, and the way that's represented. So there's some new kinds of ways that we need to have a perspective on what does it actually mean to take down a statue, which could be a replica of statue of someone who used to own plantations or slaves. There are some very interesting analyses that can be made on it. There are obviously some shortcomings too as well. Does the statue really do anything in this day and age? And how far does it go? Is it a reformist demand? Is it a revolutionary demand? I think if moving from there, Tommy Robinson, who everyone should be, familiar with his history, and he's had to lead struggles on the side of the far right over the last 10 years as well, has also been trying to rebrand himself and use any kind of slack in the rope to try and regain and push forward a far right popular movement. And so he called out a national demonstration led by sort of the DFLA, I think the Football Lads Alliance, the old elements of the English Defence League, which the left did very well at demobilising and smashing over the last 10 years. The BNP and more extreme elements of, let's say, neo-Nazi organisations like Combat 18, pulling them together in response to something they could all unite around, which was the targeting of statues of, great colonial British history, something which, people in the far right can really get behind and be proud of. It's nationalistic iconography. Then in response to that, obviously, is some of the lack of political experience by these really young kids, not to be patronizing to them, but they are really young, some of which is their first and second protest ever in their life, and don't have the political or anti-racist experience of dealing with, one, the police, and two, with the violently combative fascist and racist organizations, which have experience, decided to, say, cancel or tactically retreat from holding a demonstration. Now, it's been well debated on the left over, was that the right or wrong thing to do? It's up in the air, really. And I think my position on it is I'm not really going to, kill anyone who disagrees with having a demonstration or cancelling a demonstration. At the end of the day, we're all on the same side. My position is, as scary as it may seem, or tactically may seem we might lose, as revolutionaries or anti-racists, the odds are never in our favor. And it's in those periods at which the odds or the conditions are the worst for us, which is where we really have to pull together and all be united as one and stop the far right from growing, even if the class is not there, even if our communities are not there. And what's beautiful about what happened, I think 2 weeks ago now, is that's kind of what happened in an organic way, whereby people realized that BLM's horizontal leadership structure, whoever is leading it, backed down, and it meant that several thousand, racists of various degrees of the spectrum, or Nazis, for example, were going to come into central London and march. And obviously, not finding many people of color there, probably would go into inner city London areas and target people if they were given the chance. So in response to that, what was really interesting was you saw maybe what the left would call, and I would disagree with this, is the lumpen proletariat sort of coming together. The unemployed, those engaged in criminality, not necessarily always, just the kinds of people who I think traditionally the left would not associate as working class, trade union workers, for example. And there's obviously some history to that in the way we classify workers. But they're nevertheless working class people from local community areas came out in response to make sure that the people in their communities would not be harmed by several thousand racists. And I think that was the right response. What was beautiful about it was, in the beginning, there was about 100 or 200 people prepared and willing to do whatever it took. And I would say probably people who have, probably had some history of having scuffles in the past and are not afraid, because there's a bigger objective at the end of the day, regardless of their politics, of their political experience. There's one thing that united everyone, is the people ahead of us and in front of us want to do us harm, and these people want to hurt other people. And so what was interesting is we had, at some point, for those of you who are not there, a graphic description is no police at all. And there's an argument there that we shouldn't rely on the police. And it really happened on the day. In the beginning, there was zero police at the police designated area for the anti-racist or BLM plus associates group. There was zero. So we had 1,000 racist football fans pour out of Charing Cross and attack the square from the east side. We had several hundred attack from the north side. We had several hundred attack from the west side, all in concurrent episodes. And so there's 100 or 200 young Black and Asian men and women, and the instinct is basically to charge them as soon as they try to come into the square, repel one group back to the center, repel the other group back to the center. So it was running skirmishes for about 15 minutes, where I think some of us looked at each other and thought, we're not going to make it, because there were fireworks, homemade sort of exploding bottles, cans, I don't know what, stun grenades used in paintballing, glass bottles flying at us. And there was one point at which we were pretty sure we were going to be overrun and we were going to be toast. But the brothers looked around, sisters looked around at each other. It was like, no chance, because if this happens, this will be history in which some people on our side may be seriously harmed or even killed on that demonstration. What was maybe just coincidence or was planned was, right at the worst possible moment, a line of riot police moved in and basically stopped them from invading the small part of Trafalgar Square, which we held by the fountains. And that was really the thing that kind of gave us our breath a bit. From there, obviously with the power of social media as an organizing tool for us and for everyone really, over the course of the next few hours, the demonstration scaled to around 2,000. When we were first united with the first group of 300 people, that gave us a real confidence, because it was, it wasn't 100 versus 2,000 or 3,000 anymore. It was 500 versus 2,000 or 3,000. We like those odds, to be honest, because you could tell that the rump of the far right wasn't really politically mature or hardcore enough to really just go at it and attack our side, no matter what the cost. It was still quite soft in some sense. And so I would say on that day, we did a really good job, because the next day proved the strategy of always resisting racists and any even small green shoot of a racist populist movement or fascism arising, which is when the DFL leader declared that they wouldn't ever be coming back to London because they were scared of facing violent gangs and mobs. Whatever they categorize us as, the job was done on that day of really discouraging them, because what happened in the evenings was they were essentially, streets of London were patrolled by people in the communities, and the remnants of those who thought they would stay after their demonstration, they were hunted down. To put it no other way than crudely. So that really discouraged them. And I think that if it had been in a different way, if the day had turned out differently where they were unopposed, I'm pretty sure, like we've seen this in 2011 or 12, when maybe the first English Defence League demonstrations were unimposed and they tripled in size the next time. I'm pretty certain that we would have been looking at 10,000 or 15,000 people united in a populist movement against the bringing down of statues, against Black Lives Matter. So that's essentially a perspective on the day. We can come and talk about the politics of what leads people to cancelling demonstrations, or some of the politics going on in the POC movement, as we can call it. But hopefully that gives you an overview. I'm just cautious of talking too much. Thanks.